event. So we're excited about sharing some of Richard's experience in terms of what's been going on with COVID. We're excited to understand some of the things we could be doing when, future disasters or pandemics, et cetera, hurricanes, come about. How are other companies and teams dealing with that, and what strategies are they using to work through it? So with that, I'll go ahead and walk through a few of our standard slides, and then I'll hand it off to Richard, and we'll get started. As we get into the presentation, there will also be an opportunity where Richard's going to be asking some questions, and he'll be polling the team just kind of live in terms of responses. So Tammy and Richard will help us through that as we work on through the WebEx session here. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with CSCMP, we've got a number of different activities that CSCMP hosts. A lot of it is just around a not-for-profit organization. It was founded back in the 60s, and since then the group has expanded. It's been really focused on our mission. Oops, sorry. I'm just going to leave this up here. So we've really been focused on just evolving supply chain management profession just through teaching and education. We've got a LinkedIn account for all those that are interested in joining our LinkedIn. Please look us up, as it's called CSCMP Charlotte Group. And I'm going to hit next. And then we've got our professional development component, CSCMP SE Pro certification. And sorry, guys, this just isn't working very well. There we go. So that encompasses a lot of different certifications for the organization itself. If you are interested in those, please reach out to us. Here's a list of the various members that are involved in the board. Again, president, and we've got several of the board members on as well that helped us put this event together. We've got several upcoming events. The big one is our State of Logistics report coming in June. That'll be on June 25th. That will be another virtual event as well. And then you can see some of the others that are listed there. And then just in terms of membership benefits, there's a lot of value in joining CSCMP as a member, because you get a lot of the like the State of Logistics from A.T. Kearney, a lot of networking opportunities, et cetera. And then we have our sponsors. So we have great appreciation for our platinum sponsor, Industrial Handling Solutions. We also are happy that DCLI is sponsoring us as a gold member. And then we've got a couple that have been longtime members. We've got Central Piedmont Community College, where Mona's at, and then CVI with some of our other members. And then we have a couple bronze sponsors, Acutive and Pro Logistics. We're always looking for more sponsors, so if you're interested in that, please let us know. And then we started something last year in terms of event sponsorships. You can also just sponsor the event lunch or a networking event once COVID kind of passes us by. We can start congregating. And then we have a lot of work being done on our scholarships. You can see some of the numbers there. A lot of the funds that everybody contributes goes to those scholarships. And here you can see a letter from one of the students that we received, I don't know, a while back. I think that might have been last year. And then we also have our 2020 CSCMP Global Edge Conference. That's on September 20th through 23rd. And this year's event will be down in Florida. So with that, Richard, I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can kick things off for today's discussion. And apologies for the issues with the slides this morning.
Thank you, Peter. We appreciate that very much.
You're welcome.
All right. So let's go put this in play mode. Tammy, we're turning that back over to me for sharing. I'm not seeing the share button, Tammy. Sorry for that, folks.
Is it at the top of your window, Richard? Is there a top edit file share on the WebEx?
No. Hang on.
There we go.
All right, excellent. Well, we're going to get through this, folks.
There you go.
All right, yeah, perseverance. Well, thank you, Peter. Again, appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today. With me today is Tammy Kitajima, who is also with Competitive Insights. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible, as Peter said a few moments ago. So we will have some polling questions to add a little fun to the topic. And we also are going to have a chat feature that allows you to ask questions. We want to answer as many as we can through the time that we have for this webinar. So before we start, I'd like to just spend a moment to talk about the American Logistics Aid Network. If you haven't heard of ALAN, ALAN was formed after Hurricane Katrina. We represent the supply chain industry, and CSCMP is a very big part of that. What we do is we support the relief efforts during a disaster for groups like America's Salvation Army, American Red Cross, and other groups, basically in helping with information that makes them more effective in disaster response, and also coordinating with government, national and state governments in relief efforts. So ALAN has been very active, especially with COVID, just this recent set of events. And it's something that the supply chain industry should be very proud of. We are really saving lives through logistics. If you're not familiar with ALAN, I would ask you to go to www.alana.org and just learn more about it, because this is your organization and it's something that we can all do to help in times of disasters, if you will. So with that, we're just going to have two quick slides on Competitive Insights. We provide value to our customers by taking native transactional data and basically going through a validation process and a transformation process that is accurate, trusted, and repeatable. And what we create is a very specific cost to serve and net landed profit for every SKU sold to every end delivery location. We use that information as a foundation to solve supply chain related problems. It might be around SKU rationalization, customer benchmarking. In this case, we're going to talk about supply chain risk management. We've been very fortunate to be recognized by Gartner 4 different times. For the last 3 years that they've done Best of Breed, we've been named Best of Breed vendor for this space, and feel very fortunate that that has been something that's been recognized for the company. Okay, so let's get right into the topic of supply chain risk management. As supply chain professionals, we are all very focused on supporting our organizations around the ability to generate profit. And that's, supply chain has a very vital role in that, being able to get the product there at the right time at the lowest cost, and, and every time doing it exactly correctly, if you will. But what we've had is a double punch. We've had both the tariffs, which have been around for a long time, and COVID, which really started getting on all of our radar screens right at the end of February, the front part of March. And what we have found ourselves in is that we're not only worried about the generation of profit, but as supply chain professionals, we're also worried about the protection of profit. And the way we're going to talk about that today is we're going to focus on using specific financial information as it relates to both customers and products to be able to focus on strategies that allow us to thrive and not just survive. So let's get into that a little bit more. There are a number of different tools that we all are aware of in the market that can be used for supply chain risk management. And the one that gets a lot of attention are control towers or risk tracking or mapping systems. So control towers are obviously allowing us to see where products are, how things are moving, if we can anticipate a problem. And the mapping is basically where are our assets, our suppliers, our products, and other ways of being able to locate things that are important to us. There's also the tried and true technology associated with network design, inventory optimization, simulation, and these are prescriptive tools, often looking 2-3 years out. How can I actually add resiliency by redesigning my network? But today, we're going to talk about a new class of tools, and these are tools associated with profit analytics, where we're going to actually use detailed and specific analytical information to be smarter in how we're going to define strategies around supply chain risk. So here's a simple diagram of a supply chain, very familiar to all of us, I'm sure, where we're sourcing products from China. We're going through different ways to get them into the country or whatever country we're serving. We're getting closer to the customer, and then we have the final last mile of delivery. Very straightforward. And what has happened, you know, with COVID-19 and tariffs is that we've basically seen an unprecedented impact on a global basis. There isn't a country or industry or a company that hasn't been impacted in some way, and certainly as individuals, we've been seriously impacted as well. The length of time, no one knows when COVID is going to be over, but it's obviously having an enormous economic impact, as has the tariffs since about 2018, when the last trade war actually, or this trade war actually started. So it's a very big deal and something that we need to be thinking about. Certainly not going to be the last disruption we face as a supply chain industry. So getting into that, let's actually go take a deeper dive into risk management and talk about how we might think about being more resilient. So there's a phrase that we're going to use throughout the presentation that says, one size does not fit all. And I'm sure you've used it. You've heard it probably 100 times. But do you know where that came from? Do you know who first coined that phrase? And this is going to be our first polling question, just to add a little fun to the webinar. So Tammy?
All right, great. So let me turn on the poll here. And you should be seeing it pop up just to your right in just a second here. All right. So hopefully you see the question right just to the right, who first coined that phrase. A couple of options there. So if you could just select which one you think it is, and then hit submit on the bottom right. We'll give everyone a few seconds here. All right. Okay, it looks like everyone's filled it out, so let me close it out and post the results here. So it looks like most people thought it was Henry Ford.
All right. Well, let's see who really did coin that phrase, Tammy.
Okay. You should have it back.
So, who coined the phrase, one size does not fit all? Might surprise you. Frank Zappa. Those are hard rock fans in the audience. You may know who Frank Zappa was some time back, but he actually started to first use that phrase, which we thought was kind of interesting. Okay, so one size does not fit all. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to use specific supply chain financial insights in order to be able to create differentiated strategies. So there's a disruption, and something has happened now that is causing a lot of pain in our supply chain operation. And what every company will do, of course, is they'll look at how they're going to actually respond and recover from that. So a reactive set of actions and strategies associated with being able to minimize the negative impact that that disruption has had on the operation. That is certainly a very important part of supply chain risk management. But there's a second part, and the second part is around being proactive, where you're actually looking at ways to be able to add resiliency to your supply chain on things that you worry that could happen that could be absolutely devastating to your supply chain. So reactive and proactive, and certainly between the two, you want to have the learnings as you go through these responses to make your supply chain more and more resilient over time. So those are the two areas we're going to focus on and how to create strategies that are both reactive and proactive to add resiliency to your operation. So what is the key operating assumption associated with running a supply chain? So my guess is that what you would say is that the things that you've set up, the agreements that you've reached with your 3PLs, with your carriers, with your suppliers, and with others, that you expect those to work, the way it was established. But as we all know, especially right now with COVID, that's not always the case. But let's talk through one story that kind of makes that whole point. You're in the flower business, and you grow flowers in Kenya. And if you've ever seen the operation at Schiphol in Amsterdam, you know that when flowers are flown in from different places, including Kenya, there's a very efficient cross-dock operation where the flowers are off of one plane and onto another in a matter of minutes. It's incredibly efficient and low cost. So you're using that operation, and everybody's happy. Your CFO is happy. You're meeting customer demand on time, minimal damage on the product. So everything is just going great. So what's wrong with that picture? Well, here we go. We're going up from Kenya. We're going through Schiphol. We're going over to JFK. All things seem to be working just fine. But then all of a sudden a volcano goes off. Kaboom. And what happens? There's no flights for over 2 weeks. And you basically have flowers sitting on the tarmac, and they're basically, wilting, not worth anything. So you're actually losing a lot of money. Now, is your CFO happy about that? Absolutely not. So what would you say, Richard, what are you talking about? How would you predict a volcano to go off? How is that going to apply to supply chain risk management? Well, of course, you're not going to be able to predict a volcano going off. But what if we looked at it with a different lens? What if we said, we have 100% of all of our profit generated in the North American market traversing one lane? Would you, as a supply chain professional, worry about that? Of course you would. So what would be a logical alternative? To be able to create an alternative way to be able to move your flowers into the North American market, possibly through Miami. Might use it just a little bit, might cost just a little bit more, but you have an alternative way in case something happens of strike, whatever it might be, to that one lane that you're counting on for all of your profit. Now, when a volcano would go off or any other disruption, what would your competitors be doing if they hadn't thought about this in the same way? They'd be dialing for capacity, right? What you're going to be doing is you've already got the procedures established. You've already got the arrangements associated with your carriers. You know the protocols, and you're able to quickly respond in a way to continue to satisfy that demand. So this is a great, simple example of thinking about ways to be able to mitigate risk as it relates to servicing your customers' orders. Okay, so let's talk about measuring financial performance as it relates to the supply chain operation. My guess is that everyone on this call has, in their company, has a standard cost, and they have a gross margin associated with the actual operation. But I'm also thinking that each of you have very specific priorities associated with and probably tied to incentives on how you're actually thinking about costs associated with your supply chain. So Tammy, I think we have a second polling question on this, right?
Yes, we do. So let me just switch it over here and post our next question. So what is the primary way that your company measures supply chain financial performance? And even if you have multiple of these, just choose the one that you use the most. And just click on it, and don't forget to hit submit. We'll give everyone a few seconds here. A few more seconds. All right, let's see what everyone says here. So it looks like the majority people said, 31% said functional areas where costs have been reduced. And pretty close, 23% does say specific cost and profit measurements. So that's very good.
Excellent. That's excellent. All right, well, let's look at how we would do that then. Specific cost and profit measurements. Okay. So let's expand on that a little bit. So going from gross margin to those specific measurements that some of you said you're doing, we're focusing on, for every product, the sourcing costs, the inbound transportation costs, tariffs, of course, the manufacturing or value-added services, interfacility costs, warehousing, outbound, and reverse logistics is part of that. So having all of those costs gives you an accurate and specific cost to serve for every SKU sold to every customer. If you do the same thing on the revenue side, looking at the net revenue that you are generating from that sale, you come up with the net landed profit associated with every product being sold to every customer. And that information is really important as you're trying to differentiate strategies associated with supply chain risk management. So how are we going to do that? Let's get into that in a little bit more detail. So another story. This is a $5.5 billion operation out of Chicago. They serve through wholesalers and distributors and direct to their customers, and they have 110,000 delivery locations associated with their operation. A large DC network, their own fleet, they have carriers, 3PLs, et cetera. So a very complex operation. But they wanted to really understand, out of 110,000 delivery locations, how many of those locations gave them 80% of their profit out of 110,000. So with that, I think, Tammy, we have one more polling question to see how our audience feels would be the right answer for that, of 80% of their profit.
Yep. So let me post the next one here. All right, so what do you all think? What percentage of their customers provide 80%? All right. Seeing them come in here. All right, and I think that's about it. So let me close it out and let's see what we got here. So it looks like 38%, the majority, says the 80-20 rule, 20%. And less than 20% was second with 23.
All right. Very good. So let's see what the actual answer is. 110,000 delivery locations. And for those of you who love reducing complexity, you're going to love this answer. All right, let's go. Move right back over. The answer is less than 3%. 2,843 delivery locations gave them 80% of their profit. They were flabbergasted. So reduce complexity, absolutely. Being able to think about different service levels, absolutely. Treating customers in different ways, absolutely. But what was also very startling for them is that their customer that was number 11, their 11th best customer as measured based on revenue, was actually very unprofitable. They had no idea. So having that kind of information to reduce costs and complexity, understanding the true financial performance of each customer led to some very happy shareholder results. And this is not atypical of what we see within companies for their customers and their products. And the whole idea is to be able to have this information in a way that is accurate and trusted and repeatable to be able to make strategies that are effective in managing the supply chain, including supply chain risk. So let's get into the two areas that we want to focus on with regard to reactive, which we talked about, and proactive. And let's start with reactive. So again, there's been some form of a disruption. You are now responsible to be on a team to be able to think about how we can minimize the negative impact of whatever this disruption has been. And you want to definitely stabilize the situation as quickly as you can in order to minimize the financial impact of the disruption. And I'm sure all of you have been involved with this with COVID for sure. Okay, so tariffs have been with us since, well, for a long time, but the current tariff war, trade war, really started to heat up in July of 2018. And it's still going on, as we all know. So what's really interesting about this, as far as reactive strategies, is that DHL did a survey of just under 300 companies at the end of 2019. And they basically asked, how many of you are creating strategies to address tariffs, to be able to be smartly handle these tariff increases? What was really surprising about the results is more than 1/3 of the companies, so almost 100 companies, saying they were not doing anything. They were just waiting for the problem to go away. And that's probably not a very good answer, what I would think. And so this is an issue that a lot of companies need to address. And now with COVID, we believe that any disruption, what's going to happen is shareholders and stakeholders are going to require supply chain executives to demonstrate what they are actually doing to be able to add resiliency to their supply chain. So the old, we'll just let it pass mentality is just not going to be acceptable and probably won't survive, in the new norm that we're about to move into. So what would you do? Well, let's look at that. If we knew out of the story from Chicago that we had less than 3% of our customers giving us 80% of our profit, you're going to look at those customers in a very different way. Those customers may be able to say, look, they are buying some of the tariff-related product, but they're buying a lot of other product. We have a lot of margin here to work with. We don't want to damage that relationship at all. We're absolutely going to do nothing. We're just going to stay the course with these customers. Or you may say, well, there is going to be an impact. It is going to reduce the margin to a degree. Maybe we can get them to buy a little more. Or, well, the tariff is going to have enough of an impact. We have to smartly look at which products we want to change the price and discounts for in order to be able to offset that a little bit. But being very careful, with white gloves, to being able to be sure that you're maintaining the relationships with these very vital customers. Now, that's not the same as what you would want to do with the unprofitable customers. With unprofitable customers and you've got tariff increases, you're obviously going to be even more negative. So you've got to do something. And one of the things you could do is say, all right, we're going to go in with a different targeted price and discount strategy, and we're going to try to get them to not be a negative performing customer, if you will. Or it may be that's just not possible. And so what you move into is ending that relationship because they are a drain to your financials, and there's just no reason, unless there's some market advantage, that you would want to maintain that relationship. So again, diversifying the strategies associated with having information around customers and products is vital when thinking about creating reactive analytics that give you the ability to thrive in a supply chain disruption. But what happens if you don't know that the disruption is coming, like the tariffs that we just discussed, but it is some form of a disruption that's going to dramatically impact your operation? What do you do? Well, we're going to start with the same thing, looking at customers, and we're going to be able to understand which customers matter the most or where it would hurt the most. And then we're going to couple that with products. So thinking about what products that we're selling to be able to maximize our profit margins, and what products are not at all doing very well. And it's the combination of those two aspects of visualization of information that then allow you to start targeting very specific strategies associated with what to do. The first thing, as we talked about in the last slide, is you're probably going to want to look at those 36 customers. This is a different customer base, but those 35 customers, excuse me, they're costing you a little over $7 million, and you're losing just under $2 million on them. So if you have limited resources, say there's a product shortage, or there's some capacity issue associated with your operation due to the disruption, clearly this is one immediate area to look at to be able to minimize financial impact. But what else can you do? Well, you can look at the products and customer combinations that are giving you the vast majority of your profit contributions and create very specific strategies for those 201 customers out of about, I think it was about 20,000, no, well, I don't remember, but 201 customers, 403 products, 68% of the total profit. And if I'm going to put my energy, I only have so many resources that I can use to address this disruption, I'm going to focus there first. And then I'm going to look at the rest of the products that my really great customers are buying, but I'm going to start with protecting the things that would actually hurt the most. I hope this makes sense. And again, let's remind everyone to use the chat bar for questions. We want to be sure we're giving you as much information as that you would like to have in order to make this most useful time for you. Okay, let's move on. Here's a great Atlanta story. This is the Home Depot. Mark Holyfield is head of the supply chain for Home Depot. And they saw and anticipated the impact on tariffs and did exactly that. So they looked at every SKU that was going to be impacted by a tariff. They looked at the suppliers, they looked at third parties that were involved with it, and they created mitigation strategies to address that in order to have the minimal impact on the operation for their stores. And this article and one other we'll reference in just a moment, we can make available to you if you would like to actually read the full article. But a great story about being able to think about proactively handling tariffs. All right, if we've handled reactive, how do we approach proactive? What can we do in order to add resiliency to our supply chain as it relates to an event that hasn't even occurred? So let's think about that for a little bit. So again, we're getting into a situation where we're looking where we are vulnerable. We're thinking about creating mitigation plans that reduce the actual risk of the operation. And we're doing it in a way that we're being very focused on the things that really would matter the very most. So this is proactive strategies. No event has occurred, but we're looking to see where we could, in fact, have a serious disruption. Okay, let's focus on that. So now we're going to go from the customer side to the actual supplier side. Now these are 73 suppliers that are being used for finished goods in a company. So they have other manufacturing sites, their own manufacturing. They really wanted to look at their suppliers that were offering these finished goods and to see, is there any possibility that we might be very vulnerable with regard to a disruption associated with this supply base. These suppliers created just under $18 million in profit. And the question was, should we prioritize who to look at? So I don't know if you've had an opportunity, but CSCMP worked with the University of Tennessee and one other group, and they did a very good research project, which is ongoing, to be able to look at the actual risk of doing business in particular countries. So 64 countries. And what they did is they said, let's do this based on 4 dimensions. Let's look at the economic aspect of that country. How strong is the economy? Let's look at the political stability of that country. Let's think about the infrastructure and can it support, a dramatic increase in manufacturing? and is there competency, their business competency associated with that region, so we can have resources, hire people, et cetera. So they created this index from 0 to 5 for each of these countries to identify areas that one should be concerned with if you're doing business in them. And then we take that and we apply that to those 73 suppliers. So now we have our suppliers, as you can see on a map, that are sized by the amount of profit that they generate for us, and they're color-coded based on the EPIC index. And as we can all see, there's a big orange one right over in the China area. And that would be something you'd want to be concerned with. So if you set an index, let's just say from 0 to 5, you said, I want to look at every supplier that's under 2.25, which would mean, it's definitely in the lower range of where you want to be. And so you want to say, let's just look at those suppliers to help narrow this down because we can't look at all of them. And what we would find is we have 17 suppliers, and that represents just under $8 million in profit. And they are the ones that we would want to start looking at. But you might say, well, that's still a lot. 17 suppliers is a lot of suppliers to be able to do a detailed evaluation of what we want to do, whether we want to do dual sourcing or some other mitigation strategy. So how can we narrow that down even more? Well, what one could do is you could go and look at the actual indexes associated with EPIC. So you see the horizontal bar there is at that 2.25, so you might want to lower that or raise that depending on what you're trying to do. And then you could actually set a index associated with profitability. So I want to look at really profitable products coming from these suppliers, or I'd like to look at ones that are just marginally, but they're still very important to me. But you have the ability to change this to create a zone of interest, if you will. So obviously, the labeled zone A, which is the bottom right corner, are products that are contributing an important amount of profit, but are below the EPIC index that I selected. These are the ones I want to start with. And so when I do that, I might go from the number we had here to maybe 6 to 8 suppliers. And then I would want to look at those suppliers. I'd want to look at how much volume I'm getting from them, profit I'm getting from them, and then maybe go to a supplier scorecard to be able to identify key characteristics of that supplier in order to define if I'm going to mitigate that risk in some way. So the whole goal of this is to use that precise information on profit and cost and be able to look at areas that are not, hundreds and hundreds of suppliers, but being able to focus on 10 suppliers and be able to know that I've made a conscious decision as to what I'm going to do. And if I have done something, I have added resiliency associated with my supply chain operation. Does that make sense? Okay, then let's keep going. This is a great story. Williams and Sonoma, again, being very proactive. They had 1/5 of their product coming from China, and they knew that that was going to be an issue. So they started very early in the process to think about mitigation strategies that would allow them to be more resilient. And again, we can make this article available to you. So they went in and looked at different strategies, again, depending on the segmentation of customers, of stores and products that they were actually selling. So they looked at increasing prices in some cases, reducing costs, renegotiating suppliers, bringing some of the manufacturing back into the U.S., and fast forwarding the inventory that many companies did ahead of the tariff increases. So all strategies that were based on segmented groupings of products and the stores that were actually selling them. So what happened was very interesting, that they actually significantly reduced the volume that was coming out of China. And look at what happened. Their margins actually increased. So they were so proactive, they were able to get a great financial advantage out of thinking about those risks, being proactive, applying the right strategies, and actually increasing the ability to make money. So hopefully that's helpful to you. with regard to the actual utilization of some of the work that we're talking through today. So what is our conclusion? COVID-19 and tariffs are going to set a new operating norm, as I mentioned before. We strongly believe that companies are going to be required to demonstrate what they are doing on a proactive basis and an ongoing basis in order to add resiliency to their supply chain. Shareholders will not tolerate having disruptions that are actually just not, there's been nothing to address them in advance or during that is adding resiliency. So we believe this is something that is going to be a required ongoing part of S&OP processes or other operational strategic planning processes in order to demonstrate that resiliency. So the takeaways are this. The prior COVID-19 general operating strategies associated with supply chain risk are no longer going to work. And as we saw from that DHL survey, for some companies, the strategy was no strategy. That's just not going to be acceptable. It's going to be critical to understand the exact profit contribution of every product and customer, to use that to create differentiated strategies that are based on segmentation of customers and products. And that it can be around service levels, defining different service levels we talked about for the company in Chicago, what products you're offering, how you're handling pricing and discounts. All of that are levers that you can use in order to navigate through a disruption or to add resiliency to your operation prior to a disruption. Key suppliers can be identified and be able to be selected as to what mitigation strategies you want to use to be able to keep your supply base strong. And operating networks can be reconfigured to take out unnecessary costs, such as I'm treating all customers with the same level of service. Now that I see how important these are versus other customers, I'm going to change service levels in a smart way based on their financial contributions. Or maybe working capital, reducing inventory that is not necessary, or being able to focus on things that are allowing you to use that money in smarter ways. So the bottom line is that best practices in supply chain risk management have two very important parts. There's the reactive part, which is associated with being as agile as possible when an event occurs to be able to minimize the financial impact of that event on your operation. Being proactive to be able to look at where you need to add resiliency in order to make your supply chain stronger and have a less impact if a disruption actually occurs. But as we said from Frank Zappa, it all comes back to one size does not fit all as you're thinking about your supply chain risk mitigation strategies. So with that being offered, we'd like to provide some additional information to you if you'd like to have this. We have a supply chain risk maturity model. And basically, it's a self-assessment model where you answer certain questions around the people of your organization, the process, the technologies that you have enabled in order to help you with this, how agile your network is, are you thinking about it from a profit perspective as far as risk, and the strategies that you're using. And what we will do, if you would like to get this, is we can send this to you electronically, and you can basically complete this survey. And when we get the results back, we're getting this from multiple organizations and multiple companies, we will send back to you the benchmark results that will allow you to compare your results to the benchmark. And we're hoping this will be helpful for you internally as you're talking about supply chain risk and talking about the things that you would want to do to become more resilient, that this would be a useful tool in communicating internally. That's our goal. We also have a new white paper that will be coming out very shortly on supply chain risk that we would be more than happy to get to you as well. So with that, Tammy, let's go over and see if we've got any questions in chat, or do we have time associated with answering? I guess we do. We have about 8 minutes, right? So.
Yes, we actually have until 1:30, but yeah, everybody please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we can open that up to for Richard to answer. And Richard's email, as you can see, is right there. So if you would prefer to just send him your questions directly or call him, as you can see, that's up on the screen too.
Well, it sounds like either, go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, no, and if anybody has any comments, how do you feel about this new format? Because I hear this is the first time you're doing this online. Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, this is Peter. That was the first time, but Richard, that's a lot of great information that you shared. And if it's okay with you, can we share some of these slides with the group?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Lots of key takeaways. So I appreciate everybody's time. Just one last shot. Does anybody have any questions? If you want, obviously just remember to unmute your laptop or your phone, depending on how you're on the call. I'm just looking to see if anybody's taking themselves off mute. All right. Well, with that, guys, I mean, Richard, thank you again so much for spending your time with us this afternoon and preparing for today's event. And Tammy, thank you for hosting it with all the polling questions. That was a lot of fun. And I would like to wish everybody a good day. Don't forget that we have our next event in June. So be on the lookout for some of those emails. We will be hosting A.T. Carney, who will be walking us through the state of logistics report. So they'll have lots of, I'm sure, updates at this point in time. Typically comes out at the beginning of the year, but now we're about halfway through the year. Alex has told me that they'll have some new and interesting insights to share with us. So be on the lookout for the next event. Again, Richard and Tammy, thank you so much.
Well, thanks everybody for your time today. We hope this was helpful.
All right, guys. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mona.
Thank you all.
Bye.